Hello everybody, I'm carrying on with this analysis. The first interview, babies could have been saved. This is part 2. And I just forgot to say right at the beginning that Dr Ravi started off with basically a fact. So I thought that was interesting because, I haven't checked this, but I'm assuming that it's true that he's been a paediatrician since 1992. So it's kind of like, it jumped out to me, but I forgot to mention that he mentioned that in the first part of his answer. So we've done that page. So this is the next question. I'm going to carry on here. So the thought starts sinking in that there could be a killer on the unit. Paul Brand pauses after using the word killer. As I mentioned in part 1, Dr Ravi doesn't use the word killer or anything close to it, so that word is sensitive to him. Paul Brand looks at him when he says killer, as if to see if he's going to pick up on it and use the word himself, which he doesn't. On the unit, that's a big moment. Okay, so we're hoping to hear, or at least the audience would have been hoping to hear about something very impactful here, of a moment, a significant moment where Dr. Ravi supposedly decided that there's a possibility there's a killer on the unit. It's a big moment. So it was a leading question from Paul Brand. He didn't sort of say, tell me about it. He introduced the wording, that's a big moment. So it seems that Dr. Ravi doesn't like, at least he's sensitive to calling it a big moment. I wonder why. So he's repeating it, but he's looking for something different. So it's a big moment. He's not a stutterer. So it's to be noted that he starts stuttering. Sorry, I keep reading this wrong. It's a big moment, and it's a chilling moment. He uses the word chilling more than once in his statements. And again, as I mentioned in the part 1, he's good at picking out these words and using these words and phrases that can be used in a headline, or they can have a kind of like a lot of drama in them, because chilling is the word that he wanted to use. So he wanted to get this in here, I think. This is like one of his key words, and he uses it again. And then later on, Paul Brand uses that word himself. So it has the desired effect, I think, which is the Ravi wants these words to be like thrown around as part of the narrative. It's a chilling moment. Now, is he going to describe the moment? What is his reaction to this question? I don't think anybody. So all of a sudden, he's non-specific. Where's this moment that we were going to hear about? I don't think anybody. So he wants to make this as general as possible to appeal to the audience. That's what I think. So I know somebody like this. They have this kind of phrase or turn of phrase or way of speaking where people pick up on that phrase and then they can use it to defend that person. So let's say there's a chance that somebody wouldn't believe Dr. Ravi that there was a big moment like this, where he had a thought sinking in that there could be a killer on the unit. What if someone doesn't believe that he experienced that? He's ready. This is my interpretation. The cat's playing in the background, making a sound, sorry. So he's ready with this. He's defensive to quickly say that I don't think anybody has a rule book. So if anybody else were to come along and say, once this is not in the interview, it's just people talking in the street. Oh, did you hear about this in the news? Do you think that he thought there was a killer on the unit? Well, as he said, I don't think anybody has a rule book for how you deal with a situation. So it's kind of like this handy phrase that people can pick up on, and he's the one introducing this, so very clever. in that way. It's a big moment, and it's a chilly moment. I don't think anybody has a rule book for how you deal, so it's turned into you, so he's not I anymore, with a situation where you are suspecting, so it's ongoing, that so Lucy's gone again now, somebody's causing, I think he slurred on that word, which is why I've slashed it, deliberate, he likes that word, harm. So again, he's shying away from any word of directly what they're supposed to be discussing, which is murder and killing. I wonder why that is sensitive to him. Harm to babies on your neonatal unit. Okay, so the thought starts sinking in that there could be a killer on the unit. I mean, that's a big moment. So let's imagine that I find out something. I'm going to make something up here, like I find out someone lied who I've been trusting for almost a year. And there's a moment where I find that out. Someone wants me to talk about that. Everything goes blank. I feel this adrenaline pump through my whole body. I feel like all of a sudden I can focus on what has happened. I get this clarity, and I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to report this person to the police. They've harmed my reputation, and they've done something which has physically harmed me in my life with this lie. And now I have evidence they lied. It's just like everything, it's like a mixture of things becoming clear and things going out of focus in the background. And I've got this laser focus to like, I'm going to report this right now. And also just a feeling of dread going through me, and my body just feels so alive to like trying to make sense of all the things that have gone on in the past linked to this revelation. So has he got any of this kind of like physical experience that he had when he so-called had a big moment, and action, how you deal with the situation. So in other words, what did he do about it? So let's say if I'm a paediatrician, I think there's a killer on the unit. I'll go straight to the police and say, look, I've got this, I work in the hospital, there's a nurse here and I think she's killing babies. Please, can you send somebody straight away? You're not going to wait, you're not going to do anything, you're not going to not do anything. Okay, so action is who is actually going to do things, who's going to deliberately do things. It's not him. Okay, that's not his way. And a strange time to use non-specific. How you deal, what was I referring to? That somebody's causing deliberate harm. So if he thought that there was a killer in the unit at that moment, but he's all of a sudden saying somebody, and it's vague, isn't it? Very, very vague. And your neonatal unit. Paul uses the word killer and checks Dr Ravi reaction. Okay. So next one. There's some more like padding to the report, and then we're going to carry on with the next question and answer. Something happened which made Dr Jerem even more certain of his own theory. Paul Brand uses the word theory. That's interesting, isn't it? His own theory. Please look at Dr Ravi Jerem's face here on the interview if you watch it back on at ITV News. I thought that was quite notable. Tell me about the night when you walked in on Lucy Letby standing over the cot of baby Kay. Sorry, I accidentally put a full stop there. That is a night that is etched on my memory. He spoke quite slowly on here, so he's like picking out his words. And will be in my nightmares forever, to be honest. I think there was something about that night, but we do have some information about this case. Dr. Ravi Jairam needs to examine his conscience about his performance in his role on this day, this night, and a doctor who he should have been supervising, and the tube that was used, Tell me about the night when you walked in on Lucy Letby standing over the cot. So some of this, I think, he does have nightmares. Maybe. Because he uses the word to be honest, or the phrase to be honest. Now, mentioning honesty in a statement, mentioning honesty when you're describing something or speaking, it is a marker in statement analysis, and it can indicate a couple of different things. So one of the things it could indicate is that you're not being honest, because why are you suddenly appealing to the audience to believe you about what you're going to say? In this case, I had the idea that maybe Dr Ravi is being honest, because so much of the rest of this statement, there are things which aren't honest, in my opinion, that he can flag something which is actually honest, to be honest. Also, he's about to launch into something which is like a non-story, so he wants to make it big. He wants to make it impactful. He's going to describe basically like evidence in inverted commas. So, to be honest, he didn't feel like it was quite enough. He's trying to build up to launch into it. That is a night which is etched on my memory. Like, it's all over the place, isn't it, this sort of metaphor? And will be in my nightmares forever, to be honest. So he's nervous, maybe, because he's like adding in these things before he's about to launch into it. I was sitting at the desk, right? Sitting as mentioned in my analysis of Stephen Breary, that talking about your body posture, yes, he could have been sitting, but also the fact that he mentioned it, it can indicate tension. So I think, okay, what I'm going to say here is that he didn't respond to the alarm straight away. Maybe something like that, because why would he be mentioning that he was sitting, writing notes? Apart from the fact that that's what he was doing, but maybe he was writing notes about some of his work outside of the hospital. He was busy doing something that wasn't related to looking after the baby. Also, I'm really sorry for when I laugh, because I suppose it's not because there's anything funny, and I'm not really sure why I do that, and it's really sad what this mother has gone through, and the fact that the doctor hasn't seemed to have directly apologised to this baby who died, and the treatment around the family, and the fact that it's gone on like this. I was sitting at the desk just outside the room writing notes, and by the way, he's mentioning the fact that he was just outside the room, so he's kind of trying to give the impression that he was right on hand. You know, I was doing my job kind of idea. And the nurse looking after the baby said she was popping to the delivery suite. Popping is quite a casual word to use here, isn't it? Especially given that he quite often uses quite formal language. So popping to the delivery suite is kind of giving the impression of like there wasn't anything grave about this situation already, which we know is not actually the case, because this baby was very tiny and young and vulnerable. So popping to the delivery suite to go and talk to the parents, and she said, I've left Lucy in there babysitting. I don't know if that's a word they tended to use on, or they tend to use in these kind of units or not, but it seems like sort of very, to me as an outsider from these kind of work places, babysitting seems like a strange word, but maybe that's what they call it. It is babysitting, but you know what I mean? Not hopefully. Part of me was saying, you'd better go in and just check everything's okay. So in other words, he's arguing with himself about whether he should go and check on the baby or not, which is in an extremely vulnerable state. Because, so now again, he's using the word because. In part one, I've talked about the word because. He hasn't been asked, why did you think you should go and check on the baby? But he's volunteering why he went to go and check on this tiny, vulnerable baby. So that's sensitive to him, because you know what's happened before when Lucy's been on duty. What's happened? He hasn't said. He hasn't said anything about what's happened before at all. And in any of these clips that have been, included in these interviews here, what's happened before? you know what's happened before. So he doesn't say, I know. He's supposedly talking to himself, deciding whether to go and check on the baby or not. When Lucy's been on duty. As I walked towards, so it's an ongoing process, the incubator, I could see on the monitors. He does quite a lot of physical gestures here with his body, which he does. He's a good speaker in some ways, and he uses his body, and that gives it more energy and reliability. And he uses his body in this way to sort of like point as if like where the desk would have been and where he would be walking along, and he looks up or whatever. Excuse me. So I think some of this happened, and he's gone into the past tense, so that's quite reliable. I walked towards the incubator. I could see on the monitors that the oxygen saturations. This might be his nightmare, you see, because it's his fault. Sorry, doctor. So, which is basically the baby's oxygen levels. He talks quite quickly sometimes. We're dropping, and they drop to a level that ordinarily, number one, the alarms would have been going off. Right, we know about that, so I'm not going to go into that. Excuse me. But number two, it's nodding. The nurse would have called for help, and Lucy Letby was standing by the top of the incubator, and she didn't have her hands in the incubator. He says this quickly again. Can you see? What was she doing then? Because Paul Brand is with us. He's waiting for this like revelation of like, what happened? Something must have happened. Well, she was just standing there. Now, so he's potentially, I think he was a bit annoyed that Paul Brand tried to interrupt him there and say like, whoa, what was going on? What happened? What evidence do you have? Well, she was just standing there. Now, tubes become dislodged, but this was a 25-week gestation. Because the thing is, that is not the point of his story that he was trying to share here. He wasn't trying to say, like maybe we anticipated from the way he built up to this, that Lucy was going to find her doing something to the baby. So he says what she wasn't doing. She didn't have her hands in the incubator. It's strange to say what she wasn't doing. She didn't have her hands in the incubator. Right, I could look into that more, but it's a long statement, so I'm going to carry on with where I'm up to. This was a 25-week gestation baby who wasn't kicking around, who wasn't vigorous. The only possibility... So the thing is defending himself here because he has made some mistakes or allowed some mistakes to occur, which the baby hasn't had enough oxygen. That's my interpretation. Because he's trying to say, well, it should have been all right because this baby was so small that it wasn't really kicking around. It should have been all right because it wasn't vigorous. I'm so sorry to this baby. I'm so sorry. I really regret that the doctor didn't look after you. I'm so sorry. The only possibility... Is it the only possibility? That seems suspect, doesn't it? And I think Paul Brown can see straight through that. The only possibility was that tube had to have been dislodged deliberately. So the word deliberate, one of his favourite words, one of my favourite words, this great word to give some impact to a statement, and had to have been dislodged deliberately. He's not even accusing Lucy because he can't, he can't, because it would be just so far from the truth. He can't even say it with his words. He has to imply it. Okay, that's how most people lie. They imply certain things and then we're supposed to infer something from the way they've said it. Okay, so we're supposed to think, she was standing there. She must have been the one that dislodged it deliberately. But he doesn't say that. And in statement analysis, we don't say it for them. We take the words at face value. That's how this works. So this is the method that we're using in this. Excuse me. So... what happened doesn't say, I just said don't interrupt my flow, please, on this bit, because, when Paul Brand leaps in with, well, what was she doing then? We're waiting for something here. We're waiting for Dr. Ravi to actually tell us something of material value. Paul's eye squint. Oh, right. Which point if you watch it back on ITV News, she was popping to the delivery suite to go and talk to the parents, and I should have left Lucy in there. Paul's eye squint, because you can hardly see any expressions on Paul Brand's face. It's very interesting. I think it's quite good. Very impressive. But his eye squints a little bit. And I think he's interpreting and deciding how he feels about what Dr. Ravi's saying. Okay? Right. So I think, in summary for that one, I think that was a night that's in Dr. Ravi's nightmares. There are some truthful parts in there, and he's implying that Lucy Letby caused that baby to die. The very first thing that Tony Chambers, the chief executive, said to us. So he's got a very dramatic beginning here. But then he interrupts himself. So I think he's either not confident enough to launch into it, or he wants to create a bit more drama of how this is going to go in his recounting of this. Which I think this meeting was very dramatic for him, even to the point that I would say this was traumatic to him. This is what kind of thing he experienced as traumatic, and can't differentiate, this is my interpretation, between something that hurts his ego, that makes him feel accused, from giving statements that cause someone to be put in jail for the rest of their life, and their life is okay. You know, like, can he not? I don't think he can differentiate between like his ego getting hurt and somebody's actual life and death situation. The very first thing that Tony Chambers, the chief executive, said to us, and he's got an us in here now, he cogitated for a few seconds. Has he practiced that bit? Because that's a weird word to use, isn't it? For a few seconds. And he said, well, I can see how that might be a very convenient explanation for things. Now, I think this is interesting that he and Brewery both seem to be able to remember exactly what was said in this meeting. I think these phrases really hit them like a train. But they didn't have the effect on them to get them to rethink their approach. And what that says to me is that he'd already decided that wasn't going on. So again, vagueness here. He's not saying anything about what that is or going on. It's just this vague, timely thing. Back to the theme of time, which I see throughout this. And that wasn't going on. So what is that? And this was just, and I always say this wrong, and this was us just trying to cover up. An embedded admission. This was us just trying to cover up. An embedded admission from Dr Ravi. Thank you for that, Doctor. Now, Dr Ravi is trying to tell us what he reads from that. So in other words, his version of what he thinks the truth is what someone the most persuasive and the most in power thinks the truth is. He doesn't seem to see truth as an empirical, is that the right word? Thing that stands alone. It's like basically like who makes the best argument, that is the truth. So he wants the truth about this to be that what that says to him, that he'd already decided that wasn't going on, and this was us just trying to cover up. This isn't what he wants people to think, but he wants us to interpret it in the way that like he feels about this. So he's on the emotional reasoning again about how to interpret this thing that Tony Chambers said. He was trying to blame you, in other words. I think so. He didn't say it explicitly then. We discussed having CCTV put on the unit. We discussed her being supervised one-to-one with somebody watching her all the time. Now, this is a very quick stealing of agenda, as it's named by Jack Fox in his statement analysis work. So all of a sudden, Paul Brand is onto something here. He's trying to discuss whether the execs were blaming Dr. Ravi Jairam. He was trying to blame you, in other words. I think so. He didn't say it explicitly then. We discussed CCTV. So all of a sudden, he's like gone on to something different. Was he asking about what did you think you could do about it? What did you think? He's gone instantly onto like new subject areas that haven't been mentioned yet. Hurriedly. And I think I might have had a comment about Paul Brand. Oh no, that's a blank piece of paper. Okay, great. So that's that one. We'd bullied her. It's interesting the way they've edited this because if you watch it, there are a lot of interesting things about this interview, the way it's been done and the way it's been edited onto the programme. Dr Ravi says a lot of things that are, sound impressive enough to be put on telly. So you could say he's good at this kind of thing. And they've edited him, like they made him watch Tony Chambers, unless that's just how they've made it look, but it's almost as if Paul Brand wanted to watch him watching that. They made him read out the apology. And then on this bit, presumably it leads from something. So he might have been, Dr. Ravi might have been saying something. What they said was that we'd bullied her, but they cut it right here. So they just started it at we'd bullied her. So some more embedded admissions and embedded confessions, I think this is. So we'd bullied her, we'd behaved unprofessionally, we'd behaved in ways that were unbecoming to the profession. And then read out a letter from her, which was a very aggressive letter from her, basically saying, he slurs these words, that's why I'm slashing them, because he talks so quickly on some of his words to make it sound like really like he's in the flow. And then read out a letter from her, which was a very aggressive letter from her, basically saying, so it's not just aggressive, it's very aggressive in his mind, saying, I'm coming back to work and you have to work with me and I'm going to prove to you, sorry, I copied it out wrong because I was tired, going to prove to you that I'm a great nurse and I'm not a killer like you say. So he allows her to use the word killer. Maybe she did use the word killer. That's because she's innocent, by the way. If someone's innocent, then they don't mind saying the word killer because they know that's not anything to do with them. Whereas if somebody has actually done that, then they might say something like, that's when it happened, or that's when I did it, or, that's when I harmed him. They use like a softer word or they avoid it altogether. So she can use the word, but he hasn't been able to use it, which you might notice. I'm coming back to work and you have to work with me and I'm going to prove to you that I'm a great nurse. In what world is this? It's very interesting, I think, that he assumes we're going to be seeing this the way that he sees it. Maybe because he's been in court for all these months now, that he thinks that we're going to be agreeing with the way he portrays this, because it's kind of like we're on her side here. I'm going to prove to you that I'm a great nurse. It's not as if she's saying anything that's actually harming him, is it? The only thing that she's saying is that she's going to prove him wrong, and he finds that aggressive. The way that, I don't think it's just the way she's written or said it, it's the way that what she's aiming to do is prove that she's a good nurse. That's a threat to him. I'm not a killer like you say, that's a threat to him. And then Tony Chambers finished off by saying, so she's coming back to work. And this is the most chilling thing. So he's got the word chilling again. He likes to get that in there because he wants us to use it, I think. I'm drawing a line under this. You will draw a line under this. And if you cross that line, there will be consequences for you. So the way Tony Chambers said this to the paediatricians was so impactful to them that they can remember it word for word. Excuse me. They've probably discussed it afterwards and he said this. They've probably gone over it in their heads and, Now there was some more padding. It's an utterly impossible and a Kafkaesque situation to be in, as well as... Sorry, getting a bit tired now. Let me just try and finish this section. It's an utterly impossible and a Kafkaesque situation to be in, as well we were told when we initially raised concerns that if we call the police, there'll be blue and white tape everywhere. That's the end of the unit. It would be really bad for the reputation of the trust. So he's gone into this flowery language and talking about Kafka's situation, which is quite a erudite sort of intellectual way of talking about this kind of thing, not a down-to-earth sort of, what the hell are we going to do about this kind of thing, excuse my language. As well as we were told we initially raised concerns that if we call the police, there'll be blue and that's the end of the unit. It would be really bad for the reputation of the trust. Yeah. Right, I'm going to carry on because I've got lots more to do. It must have been an absolutely surreal experience to be sat across the table in that mediation session from somebody who at this point you're quite sure could well be a killer. So Paul Brand is quite, again, it's interesting the way he's describing it as you're quite sure could well be. So it's very subjective to Dr. Ravi, and Paul Brand is recognising that. A killer. He's using the word again, but Dr. Ravi will not pick it up. Yes, it was bizarre. And of course, to listen to her saying, I'm coming back next week, will he work with me? So again, if we're supposedly talking about a killer, is this how they would plead with a colleague to get along with them? And of course, I was having to say, well, if the trust... I mean, of course, he keeps using of course here. I think, yeah, he says of course twice. I was having to say. So it's sort of like, oh, poor me, I was having to say this. But he thinks that we're going to actually sympathise with him. Because he actually thinks that he's been done a harm here. He's been done a wrong here because his ego has been hurt, but he can't tell the difference between his ego being hurt and Lucy's life being in danger by this situation that he has partly caused, of blaming her for things that are, deaths. Of course, I was having to say, well, if the trust have deemed that you're coming back to work, I will work with you. Yes, but will you be happy to work with me? As if he thinks that we're all going to think like, oh, you had to go through this really difficult conversation. I mean, what kind of reality is he in? Not the real world. I will work with you if you're on shift because no, I wasn't happy. Okay, the very fact that the police, after listening to us for less than 10 minutes, realised that this is something that they had to be involved with, to me speaks volumes. And I could have punched the air. So this is back to, like, if you think of part one where we had the thoughts that we're ready to spring, now he's going to punch the air. He wanted to punch the air. It's a very happy, jolly, excited and victorious image and idea to have when we're talking about babies that have died. Do you think the lives of some of those babies could have been saved if management had taken action sooner? It's a horrible thing to say, but I do genuinely believe that there are 4 or 5 babies who could be going to school now who aren't. So I think he's, again, trying to come up with a headline here, in my view, of like, right, I'm going to say this thing. You might have practiced it. This like idea of these babies that didn't have a chance to grow up. And if he genuinely believes that, again, as earlier mentioned, bringing in the idea of honesty can often lead us to an idea that maybe the person isn't being honest at this point, but because there's so much dishonesty in here, I'm afraid, in my opinion, that maybe he does genuinely believe that, but he's not saying that Lucy killed these babies. Maybe he and some of the others are responsible for the deaths, and he knows that really in his heart of hearts. So he does genuinely believe this, and he's put in this kind of like impressive way to give another like phrase that can be picked up of like babies who didn't survive to be able to go to school, like I can't even, yeah. So let's just pause it there. And by the way, in the next one he says she doesn't have the courage to face up to things, to face up to parents. And I think that's a projection because now I wasn't happy, but in his recounting of this conversation, he doesn't show the courage of speaking back to her and saying, I'm not happy to work with you. I think you are hurting babies. You're responsible for these deaths. He doesn't have the courage to say any of those things, even if he thought that, or that's what he was wanting to go with that narrative. So where's his courage to face up to, things? Right, so we're going to pause that one there. Thanks, everybody.